camera, welcoming on the people who are coming. This is our 27th street stall, our 27th street stall, broadcasting to you on YouTube and also on Facebook. And let's get right into it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Saturday, it's Scotland, it's 1 p.m., and that means we're back in original form, the legible, credible, inevitable storm, which is a force for good, coming to you live from our nerve centre here in the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConaughey. And let's get right into it today. Now, really glad to see people also on YouTube because we're building up our YouTube. As many of you know, we were unfairly and wrongly taken off Twitter for something that we were entirely innocent of doing one night when they had a cull. And we were so irritated by that because we had worked for many years, 8 years, to build up a huge following on Twitter in which we were very influential, but they just took us off for no reason. Nothing we had said or done. They claimed we were somehow manipulating the platform, which we were doing no such thing. However, that was a blow to us. So what we decided, we're always fighting back, is that we would build up our YouTube platform. And this is the YouTube camera here that we'll be speaking on for the whole of the hour today. Although we're going to stay on Facebook for a good 15 minutes or so, just to get you just so we can explain to you what's been happening. Now, also glad to see on YouTube, since last week, we've had an extra 35 subscribers to the channel, which is wonderful. It was dormant for a long time. We were putting a lot of our efforts into Twitter. But now that we've really started to post on YouTube regularly, it's really beginning to grow. And we're going to get to 1,000 before the end of this year. That's our goal. Frank says, keep up the good work. And Debbie says, good afternoon. Good to hear from you. Hope everything is well with you, Debbie. And you, Debbie, you keep up the good work as well because you do a tremendous job. The first thing that we're going to speak about today, we always have done this since 27 weeks ago when the COVID lockdown started, and we realized that we would have to begin to broadcast and speak not only about this, but about other things, because there was no other way of getting our messages out. So we discovered this week, Matt Hancock was actually very helpful, and he told us exactly what his strategy with COVID is. And it's very simple. Our strategy is to suppress coronavirus while protecting the economy and education until a vaccine arrives. Well, that was a strategy that was greeted by great dismay among many people throughout social media, because is he really saying that he's going to use lockdown to suppress the virus until a vaccine arrives? A vaccine may never arrive. And even if it arrives, not everybody wants to take a vaccine. Vaccines don't always work. Not everybody takes the flu vaccine. Sometimes people who take the flu vaccine still get the flu. So why this emphasis on a vaccine, which may never arrive, which may never work, and which many people will not want to take anyway? So that seems like a wrong strategy, really. And also, he's saying he's going to suppress the economy while, suppress the economy, suppress the virus while suppressing the economy. Which is essentially destroying the economy. Now, I never thought I would live to see the day and age when a government was actually doing things which would destroy the economy, not to build it up. You know, Boris talks about building back better. That's quite a clever phrase, but it would work a lot better if you didn't destroy forward worse. You know, that's your policy: destroy forward worse, and then you're going to build back better. So lots of people, of course, are beginning to say enough is enough. And there was an interview with an MP on Talk Radio this week who said that Sir Bob Neal, who is an MP for one of the North of England constituencies, and he said, as a result of the PM's handling of this whole carry on, you can hardly rebuild the economy if you're squashing what business activity there is. And that's so true. And we know, those of us who live in these big metropolitan towns and cities, the heart of these areas these days are service economies. The cafes, the tea shops, the pubs and restaurants, the bistros, even the supermarkets with their little tea shops and so on. These are absolutely crucial, not just for the community, but also for the economy and for local employment. And these are the ones that are suffering very badly. And some of them are being destroyed and will not get back on their feet again, because many of them also just live like day to day. Really, that was when the going was good. Now that going is bad, how possibly can they survive? And something else that was pointed out to me today about this tracing app, you know, we would never advise anybody to download it. But one of the things that you essentially do if you carry it around with yourself is it's a way of destroying local businesses. Because say you get tested positive and they say, well, where were you? And you were at, Auntie Jeannie's tea shop. Well, the government are going to go to Auntie Jeannie's tea shop and close it down and say you have to close this down for a month or 2 weeks or whatever it is. So basically, your app is going about all the businesses that you go in and out of and essentially leaving a trail which could require the authorities to close these places down, at least for a fortnight or whatever. So you have to think about that. If you've got that app, that's what you're doing to those local businesses. So that's another reason that we would be skeptical of such things. We would be skeptical of such things. And also we also, as we've said many times before, we don't like the idea of calling everything cases when it's a positive test. It's a positive test. And if we presume that it works properly, then it's a test for your body having developed an immune response, having picked up, developed antibodies, which is to say, developed an immune response to the virus. It's not a hospitalization. Normally, when we use the word cases, we would talk about a hospitalization of somebody. These are not hospitalizations. These are simply positive tests. And that is a serious mistake in the language which is being used by all the politicians of all the parties and of course, the entire media. And it is giving the wrong impression about this. These are not people being admitted to hospital. These are people just doing tests and finding that they've actually got the antibodies to the virus. So that's something. Again, another thing that we saw this week is that flu and pneumonia cases are considerably higher than COVID cases, which suggests that wearing a mask and indeed social distancing and so on does not have that much of an effect. But getting back to the politics of it, and thank you for the folks watching on YouTube. We're going to switch over to YouTube shortly, so I know that we'll put the link up to the URL to continue to watch our program on YouTube. But one of the things that it was almost like an epiphany this week, I realized that devolution is perpetuating the lockdown. And it's, consider these two things. Imagine that we did not have devolution. Imagine that we had one central government in Westminster maintaining this lockdown. Do you think that politicians in Scotland and politicians throughout the rest of the UK and the media would have stood for a central British government perpetuating a lockdown for over 6 months? It wouldn't have. It wouldn't have. It would have, you'd have all the SNP MPs would be kicking up a stink about being bossed around from central London. The Scottish media would be following in lockstep with the SNP and kicking up a stink about the London politicians holding the rest of the country down. In other words, lockdown could not have occurred for this long if we did not have devolution. But since we've got devolution, what that means is that all the local administrations, Holyrood, Cardiff, and Stormont, They're all competing with each other to see who can have the best lockdown. And none of them dare loosen it for fear that other administrations or the British government will have a go at them for doing it. You know, Boris isn't now going to say, he's not going to turn around and go, guys, I think we've had enough of this. We're just going to backtrack and we're just going to stop it now. Because if he did that, the Welsh administration who hate him, the Scottish administration which hates him, and who knows what's happening with the Stormont administration, but they would all gang up on Boris and they would all maintain their own lockdowns. And here in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon isn't going to turn around and say, you know what, we're just going to backtrack on the lockdown while Boris is still having one in England. So it's like they're all contributing to a self-perpetuating spiral of lockdown, a spiral of mutually reinforcing each other's decisions. So the beast has developed with all these different heads mutually reinforcing each other now in a way that simply would not have happened if there had been one central government and no devolution. What would have happened then is Boris would have tried to get his lockdown through for 2 or 3 weeks. He'd have had his lockdown and then he'd have backtracked and we'd all be back to normal again. But it's because of all these different competing administrations now throughout the United Kingdom, all competing with each other, all trying to get one over on each other, that we've now got this process which is almost like a self-perpetuating monster. And devolution is to blame for that, because this could not have been done in the United Kingdom if we simply had one central state and one central government laying down the law. They would have been able to get away with it for a little while, but then the rest of the country would have just said, no, too much. And Boris would have realized that. But now he realizes that he can look about and everybody's doing this lockdown. It's the flavor of the day. So he's not going to backtrack on it. And he can rely upon people like Sturgeon and whoever that guy is in Wales who hates Boris. He can rely on them just to keep this whole thing going. And as for us, who do we, us, the poor people of this country, we've got all these different heads of this different hydra to try to combat now. In the past, we could have just said, British government, shut up. You've had your lockdown. You had your 3 weeks. We're all going back to normal. Now we've got everybody to compete with, whether it's Nicola Sturgeon or the bloke in Wales or whatever. So that was my epiphany, which I came to this week. And I realized that's why Britain is especially suffering from this lockdown in a way that Sweden didn't, for example. Okay, because Sweden doesn't have all this carry on with all these politicians trying to make a name for themselves. And also, of course, the media is highly complicit in all of this. The media is highly complicit. And as we never tire of saying here in Scotland, they just follow in lockstep to her when they're not actually afraid of her. So, folks, we'll be heading over to YouTube to speak more about these things shortly. But I want to finish the COVID thing by just pointing out here that who is letting us down? Our MPs and our MSPs are letting us down, because never before have we been so over-governed yet poorly represented. Over-governed yet poorly represented. There's a substantial number of people throughout the UK who want to get on with life as normal. Where are the people speaking for us? Where are the MPs? I know of one MP, Sir Desmond Swayne. I've mentioned him before. He's very good. He was on talk radio yesterday. He said that he had voted against the Coronavirus Act, the continuation of the Coronavirus Act when they had that vote. I think it was Wednesday. And he was a bit downhearted, but he said he did it because every now and again a pointless gesture is required, which was quite an amusing way of putting it. But nevertheless, that was his point. because it seems pointless, because there are no other people standing with him. Now, if I were an MP or an MSP, I would think this is my chance to make a name for myself. You know, where is the man or woman in Parliament or in the Welsh Assembly or in Holyrood or in Stormont who is going to stand up, break from the party, because that's what it would require, probably fall out with your party, but at least say, look, we have to change direction. And if my party doesn't like me saying that, too bad. But I'm going to start organising rallies in the centre of town now to talk out against this. That person would make him or herself famous worldwide if they did that. So we're being poorly served by our politicians, because at the end of the day, they are the people who create reality. As I've said before, reality comes out of the mouths of politicians. It is created by the words which come out of the mouths of politicians. Now, some politicians will say, I'm just going to reflect what the people say. The people say they want more controls. The people say they want greater lockdowns. No, the people are only saying that because that's what they're hearing from the MPs and from their leaders. When their leaders sing a different tune, the people will say something else. That's the way life works. It's not difficult. That's the way life works. Politicians have to lead as much as reflect opinion, because very often opinion is simply formed by what the politician was saying. And this is what we've got stuck into now. We don't have any politicians who are changing the frame, who are leading us out of what many politicians have got us into. So this is an opportunity for an MP or an MSP to shine if they really want to. Surely there's some people out there, goodness me, they get paid well enough. They get paid well enough. They should have enough money to take a risk for a little while, because it's affecting everybody. I mean, there's not going to be any Christmas celebrations in Edinburgh this year. Edinburgh usually has a big, next to the Walter Scott Monument, they've got a big kind of children's entertainment and all that kind of stuff. It's usually a big deal in Edinburgh over the Christmas time. It's something for children, parents to look forward to. That's all just cancelled now, which is a crying shame, crying shame. So what's the alternative strategy? Well, we've said it 1,000 times, and we're not the first people to say it. And Alison Pearson, as always in the Telegraph, summed it up very well when she said, the cure is now far worse than the disease. Prime Minister, there are people who would some rather die than live in this theatre of the absurd. The risks your scientists frighten us with are vanishingly small. Even under the Imperial College's worst case scenario, that would have still been a very small number who would have succumbed. Many will suffer with loneliness, and some will lose the will. Many, many more will perish from other diseases. It's quite simple. It's quite simple. Shield the vulnerable and let the rest of us get on with pulling this great country of ours out of the mire. Please do, please do. And David Curtin said, it is time to fully restore civil liberties and end restrictions on businesses and citizens, and stop destroying what is being destroyed at the present. The best way we can protect lives is by allowing the infection to spread among those who are not vulnerable, says Professor Sunitra Gupta, while aggressively shielding the vulnerable. And I know that older people are often considered to be vulnerable. And I was speaking to somebody recently who cleans the church after they have a service. And I spotted a letter in the Telegraph last week from somebody saying that there's actually no reason to do that, because it's perfectly acceptable for churches to be cleaned by volunteers. However, if that's not possible, the church only has to be left locked for 72 hours, and certainly not 6 months. And the point there is, after 72 hours, any virus that there may have been will be dead and gone by that time. So that's just a thought that I thought I would put out there. Folks, good to see Tommy from Glenrothes and others who are watching. I'll give you a wave to the folks who are watching. Good to see you there, chap that I've just given a wave to. We are going over to YouTube. We're going over to YouTube. If you just bear with us, we'll have the link up there. Just click on that and you'll get taken straight through to our YouTube broadcast, where we're going to speak about the SNP and all the shenanigans and things that they've been up to this week, and also to answer a lot of the nonsense which we've been reading in the National, because as we always say, we read the National so that you don't have to. So folks, please get yourself over there onto YouTube. You don't need to be you don't need to have a YouTube account just to watch it, but if you would like to comment, then you can do so through a YouTube account, which is free to do. But we need to get the numbers up here on YouTube, because if we can get 1,000 subscribers, we can start to monetize the channel, which means that we can start to earn money through adverts, which we can put into the cause. We can also then broadcast outside via mobile devices, which we can't do until we get 1,000 subscribers. So that will also help our outdoor activity as well. So that's our first requirement, is to get up to 1,000. And since last week, we got another, what was it, 35 or 36 that I said. So please, guys, come over onto YouTube. I'm going to click off here on Facebook, and thanks for watching for the first 20 minutes there. Hopefully we'll see you over on YouTube and you can comment there as well. Okay, guys, great stuff. Okay. Welcome to the folk who came over from Facebook onto YouTube. Yeah. Well, a lady sent me a wee message this morning on Facebook saying that she had discovered an article which we had written, and it was actually a little video that we did as well, called "The UK Gives Us One Big Home to Call Our Own," and we can put the link up there. And she said that this summarized very well what her thoughts were. And we had almost forgotten that we had written this. This was 6 years ago, back on the 12th of May 2014. And we're still here today, 6 years later. And what we basically spoke about is something that is at the core of our belief system. The core of our belief system. And it's that when we talk about the United Kingdom, we are speaking about one country. Now, the Scottish nationalists don't believe that. They never believe that the United Kingdom, or if you want to call it Great Britain or Britain, they don't believe that it's a country. But for us, we do believe that it is a country. That's why we don't want it to be broken up. Okay, so they don't understand that's the way that we view it. We view it as all of one nation. Of course, we understand that it's made up of smaller countries, but we also see it as one big country, the United Kingdom. And we see that the whole of it as our home, from top to bottom, from east to west, as our home and as our family. And when we frame it in that way, then that makes sense. It's like, because they can't understand, the Scottish nationalists can't understand why we don't want Scotland to be independent. Well, it's because we don't want the United Kingdom to be broken up. We don't want our country to be broken up. We want to know that when we go, as I say in the article, to Newcastle for a night out, or we go over on the ferry to Belfast, we want to know we're still part of our own country, that this is our country, and that nobody can break it up and that we're not foreigners, as it were. And we want to know that, I mean, the rest here in Scotland makes up about 1/3 of the United Kingdom's landmass. We don't want to lose some kind of referendum and find out the next morning that we've lost 2/3 of our country, which is essentially what would be happening. That 2/3 of what used to be our country is now going to be a separate foreign state. We don't want that to happen. So that's the way that we view it. And when you understand that, then hopefully some of the Scottish nationalists will see where we're coming from and perhaps might even be persuaded of the importance of that particular view. Because believe me, once such a terrible thing happened, it would be difficult to get back to it. And it definitely would have a psychological impact upon us all, because we would be losing in our minds a certain amount of our country. Now, I'm just going to check something here on YouTube, and I'm just going to ask a question here. And that leads us on to the next points that I discovered when I was reading The National this week. There's 3 points here that I want to cover, and one of them was, which is a common theme that we hear all the time from the Scottish nationalists, is we're not respected at Westminster. We're at Westminster, but nobody listens to us. We don't have any say. Well, all of that is, of course, highly arguable, but one of the reasons that they're perhaps not respected is because they're not respecting the Westminster Parliament. They literally joined it with the aim of seceding from it, with the aim of breaking up the United Kingdom. So they can't really be expected to be treated too respectfully. They are, of course, treated generally respectfully, but they can't complain if they're not, because they are genuinely trying to break up the country. So you don't. If the SNP, for example, had gone into Westminster with the belief that they were going to campaign for the best interests of Scotland within Britain, do you know what? They would get a lot of support for that. People would say, yeah, well, they're a unionist organisation who just simply want the best for Scotland within the United Kingdom. Lots of people would get along with that. Not much of a problem with that sort of attitude. But no, they went into it with the belief that we're going to take Scotland out of Britain. Forget the best interests of Scotland within Britain. We're going to take Scotland out of Britain. So if you go into a parliament with that attitude, don't expect to be treated too respectfully. So you're working against the very integrity of the United Kingdom. How do you think you're going to be treated? It's very sad. I mean, you should be working for the best interests of Scotland within Britain, which is what we have to presume the Scottish Tories, the Scottish Labour and the Scottish Lib Dems are doing. They're looking out for the best interests of Scotland within the United Kingdom. Perfectly understandable, perfectly good point of view. And a Scottish nationalist party that wasn't a separatist party, but was actually a pro-British party, that would be a different game. Of course, we don't have that. And we're probably never going to get that. The other point that comes up, and again, it was another letter in the National, was why is it necessary for the United Kingdom government to give consent to Scotland having a second referendum? Well, it shouldn't have to be said, but it's because the United Kingdom government represents the primary state, which would be potentially broken up, or at least affected in a very bad way by the vote either way, whether it was a yes or no vote. The United Kingdom is the state that's going to be affected. Therefore, of course, it has to be able to give, it has to have a say in what's happening, and should also be able to give consent to that. It has a perfect democratic right to withhold consent, and it has a perfect democratic right also to give consent, but it has the right to withhold or hold consent because the people of Scotland have legitimised the Westminster Parliament. We legitimise Westminster every time we vote for an MP here in Scotland who says that he or she is going to go and sit in Westminster. We legitimise the Westminster Parliament, and that person's presence legitimises the British Parliament as the primary parliament in these islands. And it also, of course, as that primary parliament, it has a duty and responsibility to defend the integrity, the cohesion of the United Kingdom and the interests of all the people of the United Kingdom, not just the Scottish, the Northern Irish, the Welsh, and the English too. So Westminster has a perfect democratic right, which has been given to it by the people of Scotland when we vote to send MPs to Westminster, and it also has a duty and responsibility to maintain the integrity of the United Kingdom and look after the interests of all the people of the United Kingdom who would be affected as a consequence of the vote, whatever way the vote went. And especially, of course, if the vote went for separation. So yes, the United Kingdom government does have the responsibility, the duty, and the democratic right to withhold consent, Mr. National Newspaper letter writer from Bishopton. And following on from that, people will say that if the British government did not give consent as a consequence, did not give consent for a second referendum as a consequence of the Scottish National Party winning a majority at Holyrood, then Scotland is being ignored. That's ignoring the will of Scotland. No, it's not that views are being ignored. It is that a Holyrood result, that is to say, a result in a devolved administration's election, is not a sufficient mandate to demand a second referendum. And I'm about to tell you what the sufficient mandate would be. But an SNP win in a Holyrood devolved assembly election is not a sufficient mandate for a second referendum. What would be a sufficient mandate? A sufficient mandate would be the SNP winning a majority of seats and over 50% of the entire electorate at a British general election on an abstentionist platform. A platform that says, vote for us, the SNP, we're not going to go to Westminster if we win. And they would have to get over half of the entire electorate at such a referendum, at such a general election. And then we can start talking about sufficient mandates. But a sufficient mandate is not a simple win at a 4-yearly or 5-yearly, a Holyrood, a devolved administration election, especially when that devolved administration is an arm of the British Parliament and is subservient to the British Parliament. No, if you want to break up the United Kingdom, you're talking about mandates at the British parliamentary level, not the devolved assembly level. that's when you start talking about mandates. And as I say, it would have to be on an abstentionist platform, on a platform that says we're not giving you any legitimacy if you elect us. And we're some way away, thankfully, from such a thing. But we're going to need to hear that being spoken a lot louder in future, because we simply cannot accept the SNP, if they were to gain a majority next spring, to imagine that they are going to have the authority to hold the rest of the United Kingdom to ransom, which is what this is about. Because if you live in Wales, you don't want to see your country, the United Kingdom, being broken up as a result of a very small minority of Scottish people. Similarly in Northern Ireland, similarly in England, you don't want to see just a couple of million people at most getting away with breaking up the United Kingdom. We can't have that. The United Kingdom, as we always say, getting poetical, the United Kingdom is the great work of time. It's not something that is just that should just be destroyed so easily. It's a really precious inheritance, a very, very precious inheritance, the great work of time. And give a quick plug, of course, to our wee book for the Union, where we make this case about the United Kingdom being the great work of time. How do we put it? It's a Union story which goes right back to the dawn of time. And we make the positive case here for the Union, tracing its origins within the midst of time, through shared national upheavals, through regal and political union, to the point where we can speak today about the United Kingdom as more than a mere family of nations, but as a nation of families, as more than a union of nations, but as a nation of unions. And we'll stick the link up for that. It's only a £5. Christmas is coming. Buy one for your grandchildren, buy one for your friend, buy one for your local MP even. Really good value and sells very well. And it's time, as we said this week, time to stock up on the intellectual ammo. And this is a great wee addition to your intellectual armory. A wee book for the Union, available from us at aforceforgood.uk. Just go to aforceforgood.uk, look along the top, you'll see shop, click on shop, and we've got a variety of stuff there that we sell. A variety of stuff. Now, this month is Black History Month. Did you know that? We only discovered it yesterday, because apparently everything now has to be racialized. And it seems you can't get away from this racialized agenda that the media are promoting. So it's Black History Month. But for us here at A Force for Good, every day is British History Month. And every day in British history, we reach out and find inspiring stories, some of which include people who might be considered to be from what's called ethnic minorities. But we don't make a fetish about that, and we don't make a fetish about them. It's just simply part of our history. And I'll get to that in a moment. Yeah, somebody pointing out there that William there pointing out that at the 2014 referendum, the Sun in England was all for defeating the Scottish nationalists, but its sister paper in Scotland, was all for defeating the Unionists. So yeah, good point. Yeah, so but back to Black History Month, and just to point out, this is all just part of the culture war, really. Don't get us wrong, we're all for history. We love history of all races and all peoples and all nations, and we're fascinated by it entirely. But it does seem strange that we get such a thing. I think that Nick Timothy pointed it out very well in an article in the Daily Telegraph. He said, "This is the way things work in this modern war of words. And what drives the war of words is the culture war. A culture war is vital and total for its protagonists because while political power can be determined by elections, shared and handed over from one side to another, the battle to define a culture is different. There are no set and regular events like democratic votes to determine who decides. There is only ever one long, hard, and unforgiving fight. Ungoverned by rules and lacking even a referee, everything falls prey to the vicious battle to control culture, including, most important of all, the words we use. Dictate our language and control our culture. If you control our culture, you dictate our future politics. Nothing less is at stake." Well, that was certainly recognized by Donald Trump. And last week we pointed out that he had produced an executive order which banned some of the crazy race theories from being taught through the federal government, and not just banned it being taught, but banned the companies that might teach it elsewhere from being employed by the federal system. That is to say, the American government and military systems. So that was a proper law that he did. And that's what we'll need here in the United Kingdom as well, because I did notice that the Culture Secretary had written a letter to some of the governmental bodies advising them not to remove statues or anything like that. Well, that's all very well, but it's going to take a lot more of a harder attitude, really. It has to be written into primary law to stop our taxpayers' money being abused by these taxpayer-funded museums and charities. This is the thing, lots of charities that you don't think have anything to do with the government, they're actually receiving huge amounts of taxpayer money. Lots of charities that are not, they're not branded as UK or British charities even, or royal charities or anything. It's just like charities. They're getting like tons of taxpayer money for lots of stuff. So, if you had a really revolutionary conservative government, it would just strip all of that bare and totally destroy that ideology by so doing. Somehow I don't think they've got the fight for it. They don't strike me like the kind of guys that have got the fight for it, but who knows, maybe in time people will arise that do have the knowledge. There's certainly got enough of those people in the United States who understand what's going on, which is something. Jonathan says, are the post boxes in Scotland being painted? I'll just address that right now. William saying that he's entirely British because he's got Scottish, English, and Ulster blood as well as Welsh running through his veins. Absolutely, that makes you British. Jonathan, yes, there is. This is just because of Black History Month, so called. The Royal Mail has taken upon itself to paint 4 post boxes black in commemoration, I suppose, of what black people. There's one in Glasgow. There's one in Scotland, England, Northern Ireland, and Wales. The one in Glasgow is honouring the first black player for Rangers, who was called Walter Tull, Tull. I know of Walter Tull, interesting character. The one in Belfast is honouring Lenny Henry for some reason. I spoke about Lenny Henry last week, and here he's getting a post box. He's still alive as well. I don't know why he's getting one in Belfast. One in England is in London, and it seems to be, if I understand this report correctly, commemorating somebody called Yinka Shonabari, which doesn't sound black, but I don't know who that is, who's an artist apparently. But here's the one that's interesting. The one in Cardiff is to Mary Seacole, and we've spoken about Mary Seacole before in this week in British history, and we like Mary Seacole. Okay, some people go, oh, Mary Seacole, she only gets attention because she was black, well, not really. She was an extraordinary character in her time, and she owned a hostelry um, during the Crimean War out there in the Crimean, where she I don't know much of what went on in the hostelry, but she certainly got very famous for it, and she was very well known during her time. But here's the thing with Mary Seacole: her father was a white Scotsman, and her mother was a Jamaican, and she considered herself to be a Creole. And she did not she shall we say, she had a poor opinion of basically all the races that she came in contact with, except the British, whom she liked and loved and looked after very much. But she did not like other races, from Greeks to Turks to black people to Arabs and Jews. And she's on record as in her autobiography of being what you would call today racist to these people. Um, and there's an article, actually, we'll put that article up there, about Mary Seacole. And Chris McGovern, who writes for the Conservative Woman, he's done a little bit of research on that. And it's quite amusing articles that he's written about Mary Seacole. But we do like Mary Seacole. But the funny thing is that the system that, like the Black Lives Matter people, if they were honest, they probably would call her a racist, And we're not saying that like in any way to take from her memory. We're just pointing out that that's how they would view her if they were honest about it. But she was a great woman, and she did a lot of good work for Britain, and we always remember her notable dates of birth and death as well on the page. And she does have a very impressive statue outside the hospital, the hospital that sits down at the Thames there. What's that one called? Which we've seen, a huge statue, actually. Jonathan's asking, any update on Henry Dundas? No update on Henry Dundas as yet. We're watching. If anybody finds out any more information about what's happening with the statue and the plaque, please tell us, because we definitely want to follow that up. Pete is saying that Comic Relief are heavily invested. Yeah. Some people have complained about some of their spending issues, I guess. I don't really know much about that, though. I wouldn't want to comment on that one. Yeah, send in your questions, folks. Send in your questions. And also remember to head to our shop. Check out, once we get back out there, we'll be doing activism. Get your umbrellas, which are just as good as flags when it's raining. And every house, as we always say, every household should have at least one Union Jack. There you go. It's a 3x2. We've specially produced it. We got loads run off. It's got a nice hem where you can actually, it's an open hem with a tie, so you can put a pole in there. And that's how you hold it, with the thick, broad white stripe in your right hand when you present it to the public. Get that at our shop. Well, continuing the week in British history. Today, 3rd of October, back in 1916, James Herriot was born. Now, not a lot of people know that James Herriot really is really to be considered a Glaswegian, because his mother and father were from Sunderland, and they moved here because his father was working in the docks as a ship plater. But his mother moved back to Sunderland for a few weeks to the family to give birth to James, but then moved back up to Glasgow, where James attended Yoker Primary School Hillhead High School and Glasgow Veterinary College. And then he was, of course, as we know, to get his first job in Thirsk in Yorkshire, where he stayed ever since. William's asking, do we have linen 5x3s? We don't have linen 5x3s. Sorry, these are that would be a high quality flag. A linen 5x3. Sorry, we don't sell them. But this is quite a good quality 3x2 anyway. 4th of October in 2009, the memorial to the Special Operations Executive, which were the secret agents during World War II, that was unveiled on outside Lambeth Palace on the Albert Embankment, and it carries a bust of Violet Szabo, who was posthumously awarded the George Cross. Also on the 4th of October in 1814, Alexander Seton was born in Aberdeenshire, and he's the man who is credited with the women and children first idea, because he was in charge of the men who were on the ship that crashed off South Africa back in 1814. And he saw that there was only a few lifeboats. And so he said, women and children first. And that's where the famous phrase comes from. That was Alexander Seton, Seton, who was born 4th of October, 1814. On the 5th of October, 1963, one of the most iconic Britons of popular culture was unleashed into public consciousness with the first James Bond film released on that day in the London Pavilion, and in the book You Only Live Twice, we discover that James Bond's father was Andrew Bond from Glencoe. So we like that fact. We like the fact that he was half Scottish. And of course, various Scottish soldiers have been suggested as the inspiration for Ian Fleming's James Bond, including Fitzroy MacLean, David Stirling, who founded the SAS, and Lord Lovat, who was also a British commando leader. On the 5th of October last year, 2019, the Smurfs had their annual outing up the Royal Mile. I'm speaking, of course, about the SNP marchers who staggered up the Royal Mile. Some of them made it to the top. We were there with our thin red line to count them, and we'll put up the link to that. We counted 11,286 of them, which is pretty accurate, give or take 1 or 2%, of course. But unfortunately, Joanne Cherry tweeted out that there was 250,000 of them. 250,000 of them. That's her tweet on the 5th of October, 2019. She says, what a day, 250,000 behind us marching for independence. What an absolute disgraceful lie. Utterly disgraceful. But that's what these people do. They just lie. I never knew that until I got into Scottish politics, to realize that the nationalists just lie as a matter of strategy, almost like as a matter of principle. They just lie. I used to think lying was wrong. I still believe lying is wrong, but they seem to think lying is okay. So yeah, there was 11,286, and we did create a little bit of a fuss about that, and we did get our figures mentioned in the Times. Council cannot verify rally turnout claim, and we get mentioned there. Both our count for last year, 5th of October, and our count for the 6th of October, 2018. The 6th of October, 2018. And the count for that was, they said they had 100,000, but we counted them in at 12,789. So they actually got more people up the Royal Mile in 2018 than they did in 2019. However, in 2019, they said they had 2.5 times what they lied about in 2018. So they're all over the place, these folk, all over the place. It's such a pity that we have to deal with people who have no respect for the truth. But we have respect for the truth, and we will keep respecting the truth and bringing you the facts of the matter. On the 8th of October in 1775, Henry Duncan was born at Loch Ruttan in Kirkcudbrightshire, and he is the man who is credited with inventing savings banks worldwide. And he invented, in fact, what's now called trustee savings banks, which were to come into operation as a result of his example. But of course, the TSB group these days is struggling, so it seems. But the concept is a very fine one. Christopher's saying, yeah, it's strategic lying. That's so true. We do have socks. We've got a Force for Good socks, Pete, on our Teespring link. We'll put the Teespring link up there. And on the Teespring link, you can get T-shirts and hoodies and all sorts of things emblazoned with Scottish and British, English and British, British Ulster, Welsh and British, British and proud, so on and so forth. Good. I see that one of the colleagues has already posted the Teespring link. Wonderful. So you can get socks, but they're Union Jack heart socks with a Force for Good written through, if I recall correctly. And then on the 9th of October in 1895, Billy McFadgen was born in Lurgan in County Armagh. And of course, he was to go on to become a very famous VC recipient. So folks, if you haven't already if you're not already subscribing to our fortnightly email, please go to aforceforgood.uk/support and put in your name and email, and that will ensure that whatever happens to our social media platforms, you'll still be in touch with us, because that's so important. Also, if you're not yet subscribing to us on YouTube, it's free. You simply click that red button. If you don't have a YouTube account, it will ask you to set up one. They call it a Google account. Take you 5 minutes, and then you can subscribe. You can leave comments in the live chat. You can leave comments below the video. You can give us a thumbs up. You can do all these sorts of things. But let's get the subscriptions on YouTube up there, because once we can build this up, we can have all sorts. The sky's the limit. You know, the sky is the limit. And as you know, we've got a lot to say. We can say it very well. We've got a lot of good people behind us here. We've got a great team, Facebook team, Instagram team. Instagram's off the chain these days. We're approaching 4,000 followers on Instagram, which is amazing stuff. By far and away the biggest pro UK unionist voice of any kind on Instagram. And we're only going to get bigger and bigger there. We have a great Instagram curator, produces great content each day for us. We have a good team behind us on Facebook. We have a good team behind us doing videos helping to do videos with us on YouTube. So please give us whatever support you can. Buy a wee book, buy some of our merchandise, or if you simply want to give us a donation, you can do that at forceforgood.uk/donate to, or become, of course, a monthly subscriber, a monthly donor. We call them union supporters. And our union supporters are the backbone of what we do here, because they ensure that every month we've got enough to keep going for the next month. And we'll put the link up there as well for union supporters. So folks, it just remains for me to say thank you very, very much for watching. It's very much appreciated. God bless the United Kingdom, and God save the Queen.